All right, so this time we're talking about, specifically for a while at least, the city of Athens, which becomes extraordinary amongst the hundreds and hundreds of Greek cities in the fact that it creates a democracy. It creates voting rights to some extent at least. So it becomes very different from the rest of the Greek cities and different from almost any other government that has existed up to this point in human history. And will be very different from most other governments in human history. So Athens is extraordinary, and we'll talk about how and why they create this democracy, basically to solve major social problems. And the immediate results of that, their democracy is pretty firmly in place by the late 500s BCE, so around the year 500. And then going forward toward year zero, into the 400s, the democracy in Athens becomes a worshipped thing in and of itself. So it's important history to go through, and it's something that whenever, if you go into study like the early United States history or the creation of modern democracy in the past few hundred years, all the people involved in that studied Athens. People like Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin. Jefferson especially, and educated people of his kind of class that lead the American Revolution, they studied Greek history, especially Athens, to the extent that they read Greek. They read the language in order to read the original books from the Greek writers in the original language. So this becomes such an extraordinary thing that it's studied for 2,000 years. And was a major source of high-level education until pretty recently, just the past few decades, it's kind of gone away. It's not required for college graduates. Yeah, Greek and Latin. And up until about 100 years ago, if you were going to get a college degree, you would have to know one of those two languages. So that's kind of gone away, but depending on the major that you want to go for. All right, Athens. I like this map because it shows that Athens is one of only hundreds of cities out there as possibilities. So you can see a lot of Greek cities all over the kind of Eastern Mediterranean. Athens is here, kind of in the southern middle part of this island called Attica. But it's just one city out of hundreds of Greek cities, different Greek societies. And they're very frequently all fighting each other for hundreds and hundreds of years. So ancient Greece is a fairly chaotic type of place in a lot of ways. Athens, for most of its history, at least up into the 500s, was ruled by a monarchy. They had a royal family. They had a king. And over time, every once in a while there's a revolution against the king, and once you throw out one king, they usually just replace one king and pick someone else to be king, a new family, and put them on the throne for a while. Going into about the 600s, 700s, they realized that it's not really working very well. So eventually they create this Council of Archons, which is basically like a city council. I think there's 9 of them, 9 guys on this council, and they're basically running the city. They're passing the laws and enforcing laws, and they're running the government. So it's not a monarchy anymore, but it's still very much controlled by the wealthiest families.
Is it just one family or multiple?
It's multiple families, but they're all extremely rich. And the way you got rich in the ancient world was to own land. If you own thousands of acres of land, you either rent it out or you pay someone to farm it for you. And you and your family can stay in the house and save your money or build a bigger house or buy more land or throw big parties or whatever you want to do. So the more land you had, that usually meant the more money you're making. So wealthy families are almost always big landowning families. And there's a few families in Athens that they're basically like little political parties. They're kind of arguing with each other, trying to get better position for themselves. But the whole council is run by different facets of these families. So they're hugely corrupt. They continually, for several generations, pass one law after another that mostly favors themselves and the rich, their own class. Number one, they allow slavery in Athens, and most slavery in Athens is a result of debt. If you go out to borrow money to start a business or buy land or do whatever you want to do with money, this council has passed laws allowing high interest rate on borrowing, on debt. And if you can't make what you today think of as a monthly payment on your credit card balance or your car loan or your house mortgage, if you fall behind in the payments, then you get enslaved to the person you borrowed the money from. Does it make sense? Until you work so many hours that you work off the debt, which could be years. Question?
You answered it.
Ah, okay. But because the people you end up borrowing money from are usually rich groups. Does that make sense? Because they have the money to loan in the first place. If you look at who owns banks and credit card companies and whatnot, it's usually conglomerates of very wealthy people. And they're running the government, and they start to realize that they can make a lot more money by making loans at huge interest rates, like 30, 40% interest, which we today call basically vulture loans, that are designed to get people in debt to the point they can't pay it off in order to get slave labor from them. Does that make sense? Yeah. So a lot of people are being enslaved in Athens for years and years and years. And a lot of people in Athens don't like it. They recognize that these lenders are just taking advantage of the system, and they're making so much money off the system that they bribe the council to allow them to continue doing it. So it's basic corruption. Does that make sense? All right, so debt slavery is a massive problem in Athens, and it has generally angered the population of the city. Another thing that they pass is generally lower tax rates for the rich than for everybody else. So if you're a big landowner and you have your big house and you're making huge amounts of money, you pay a lower percentage of your income in taxes than anyone else in society. Does this sound familiar?
Not at all.
The same thing is still happening.
The Republican Party.
Well, there's an argument. I mean, some Democrats and other parties are involved in it too. But their argument is basically if you lower taxes on the rich, then the rich can make more money, they'll hire more workers, and the benefits will, they say, trickle down to the working people. They made the same argument in Athens back then, and it didn't work then either. It doesn't work today. It's empirically provable through economics. But this idea keeps coming back over and over again. The council very much believed in that idea. And why is that?
Because they don't want
They
to tax
don't
them.
want
Because they are the rich. They want to lower their own tax rates. So they pass laws where they pay less as percentage of what they make than just average working people out there barely, getting enough money together to survive on a weekly basis. Okay. Questions about these at all? Nope. All right. So they are the dominant. They are the elite of society. Everybody knows it, and pretty much everyone knows who these families are in Athens. And they're very unpopular. There's a lot of kind of social hatred against these people. So this results in a giant amount of, you would call them, peasant farmers or workers. People making things out of glass or metal or, artisan type workers. And they're really angry about this. And they're not stupid. They understand what's going on. And every once in a while they threaten the council. They say, you better change these laws or we're going to overthrow you someday. But the council generally ignores their demands and says, yeah, right, you're never going to be able to accomplish anything. And then they actually do. There is a revolt in Athens against the council at around the year 600 BCE, to the point where the masses the mass amount of people forced the council to accept their guy as the leader of the city.
Was it like a coup or how did?
It's not exactly a coup. They don't kill off all the families, all the council themselves. They just kind of replace them with this one guy. So he becomes basically the mayor of the city.
But how they get them to even play along with that?
Outright threat.
Just threatening.
Yeah. And basically saying, we're the mass amount of society. You can get your little bodyguards together, but if we attack, you may kill the first of us to get to you, but we're just going to overwhelm you with numbers. And unless you give in to these demands, there will be a slaughter, and we will go to your mansions and burn them down. So it's physical threat of violence.
And it worked.
And it worked. So the massively popular politician named Solon goes into office as basically the mayor of the city, the sole archon. And he has a huge amount of power at this point. The people are on his side, and he realizes he can force through really whatever laws he wants. And he makes promises to the people to keep their support. And what do you know, when he's in office, he actually fulfills his promises and creates new laws and cancels some old laws that he thinks are unfair to the average people. So number one, he cancels all that slavery from the kind of what we today call predatory lending practices, the vulture loans, limits the amount of interest that you can charge on a loan, and breaks up giant pieces of land that are owned by one family, thousands of acres of land, says that this family, they can still keep maybe like 500 acres or something like that. But anything they have beyond that will now become city property and will be broken up into smaller pieces and handed out to the poor. Question?
Do you know the names of the top rich people?
A few of them, but not all of them. I just don't know the history that well off the top of my head.
What was the first thing that he limits? I know.
Debt slavery.
That's the.
Yeah. And in fact, it passes a law that just cancels ends the slavery of people that were enslaved. He frees slaves, literally, and declares that whole lending practice to be so unfair that it shouldn't be happening anymore, and stops it.
So was any citizen that's in debt allowed to be taken into slavery like that?
Well, there's a certain threshold you have to be. It's not anyone who's in debt. It's if you haven't made the payments for so many months. It's basically like
Collection?
it's like having your car repossessed, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to go so many months without the payments, and then they can come get you.
No, but like say for some reason one of these big families ended up getting a lot of debt, and so they borrowed from somebody and ended up.
Well, usually
behind.
the big families, they have so much money coming in all the time that they don't have to borrow.
Well, I'm saying that it could apply to anybody.
It could theoretically apply to anybody, but the reality was that the rich don't usually borrow.
Well, they would have changed the law probably if it applied to them.
Yeah. And even today, that's generally the difference between the rich and everybody else. If you're rich in the world today and you want to go buy a house, you pay cash. Because you maybe got $400,000 in your family just laying around in a bank account not doing anything. I want this house, here's the cash, and now I own the house. The more working class people don't have $400,000 laying around usually, right? Unless you've been saving a little bit per month for a long time. But mostly working class people, they want to buy a house and they have to borrow. They have to go to a bank or someone that will lend them money and agree to make payments over usually 30 years. Anybody ever bought a house in here before? It's a long, arduous process, and most of it is just getting the loan in the first place, finding someone who's willing to loan you the money. And they write up a contract. You're going to pay this much every single month, year after year after year. It's like several pages long. They write it out. In August of 2042, you're going to be paying this much. So it's very detailed.
Yeah.
And if you ever go to sign those loan documents, I mean, it's so much paper to sign. Usually takes like at least an hour just to sign your name over and over again. It's
Wow.
2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tiny in area. Awesome.
Yeah. And when I bought a house in, what was it, 2008, I was actually making the bank's representative, their rep, angry because I was actually reading this stuff.
Well, that's how like the market, the housing market crashed because people didn't read any of them and they houses.
Yeah, and the banks basically lied to people,
Yeah, all
which
these
is
horrible loans.
fraud, which is real fraud. A lot of those bankers should have been thrown in jail, but
Of course not.
who's running this place?
It's America.
So yeah,
Did
there's
Orcon have
good
like a-
movies, films, documentaries that discuss that in great detail. So
I'll write that down.
yeah, but
That's a good question.
the bank's representative at that meeting was getting really pissed off because I was sitting there reading the damn document, and he said, "Oh man, we're gonna be here for 8 hours because there's so much to sign, so much to read."
Should have told them I'm buying the house here now.
Yeah. But yeah, it did take several hours, and they weren't happy about it. But I don't remember what I read at this point. But they give you a copy of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of these practices are still going on today, and my opinion, personally, a lot of the corruption is still going on today. So you get similar systems that we're talking about back then. But Solon wanted to fix this for the long term. He realized that if he just pushes some laws through while he's in office, at some point he's going to leave office. I mean, at some point he's going to die at least. And if he doesn't figure out a long-term solution for this to keep the mass of people in power, then the rich are going to come back and take power again and undo everything that he had set up. Does that make sense? So he tries to figure out a system of keeping the people kind of politically mobilized. And this is one of the first giant steps in building a democracy. The democracy is not finished at this point. This is just step number one. But this is basically his lifetime in office. Does that make sense? So this is in the 590s. And as things, I thought I had another slide. As things tend to do, he eventually left office and then died. And then the system he put in place gradually got corrupted over the next few decades. So by the mid-500s, about 40 years later, the rich have come back into power. They have convinced the masses that they're not going to go back to the old ways, but they think that this stuff is too extreme and they want to find some kind of middle ground between the old Archon's ways and what Solon wanted. So gradually things get worse and worse and worse for the working people over the next 40, 50 years. And there's another revolution at around the year 500 or 510. In the middle of this revolution, the people overthrow the Archons again, and they decide to have basically a mass election in the city. Who's going to lead the city now? Instead of just replacing one group of rich people with another group of rich people. One of the big candidates in this election is named Asagoras, and he is obviously from a rich family. So he is kind of one of these financial conservatives, and a lot of Athenian people are afraid of him because if he gets into office, he's going to run the place for the rich again. Another candidate is named Cleisthenes. Cleisthenes realized that the rich were not going to support him. So as Cleisthenes gives speeches trying to get votes, he makes promises to the people. If I get into office, we will build a long-term reliable democracy to empower the average people. And he wins the election and goes into office and leads a giant transition into a full-blown democracy for Athens. So he and his advisors, they come up with the plans for how this new government should operate. And it's basically divided in two different sections. One is a group called the Council of 500. this council will basically enforce the laws. They are chosen by random choice, by lot. Everyone's name is put into a hat. You pick out a bunch of names from amongst the deans. The deans are voluntary debate groups throughout Athens. You have to be a male citizen to participate in the deans, but there are thousands and thousands of guys involved in these things. There's 10 different deans throughout the whole city, and again, they're mostly voluntary, so you don't have to show up if you don't want to. And each dean gets to send 10 of its own guys to the council, or 50 of its own guys. And that's how you get 500. And the deans do not vote for who they send. They put all the volunteers who show up that day. Basically all their names go into a big basket, and they just randomly pick out 50 names. And if your name is chosen, you go on to the council. Does that make sense?
So you said 50 from each.
Yep. And there's 10 of them, so 10 times 50 is 500. And they are the law enforcers. They become the kind of police force and the tax collectors and on and on and on.
Gotcha.
So they have the executive power of the city. They enforce the laws. That's what the executive does. They don't make the laws. The assembly will make the laws. And the assembly is the second half. The assembly is basically the legislature. And the assembly is made up of any male Athenian citizen that wants to show up to the debate. And the assembly meets almost every day to propose laws and talk about whatever they want to talk about, really. And they meet on a certain hill in Athens. And sometimes thousands of men are there to take part in the debates.
So pretty much they're like hundreds.
Yeah.
Like the House
If-
Assembly.
If every citizen was allowed into Congress and got a vote. Does it make sense? So it'd be like, instead of like Fontana has a city council, right? You get rid of the city council and you have debate days for the whole city, and any citizen in the city can go to City Hall and not just make speeches, but take a vote on the law that's proposed. And if whatever laws that they accept, the average citizens who show up that day, when they vote, if that law passes, then it goes to the council to be enforced. Right? So the council is basically the policemen and the firefighters and blah, blah, blah. People who enforce the laws that the citizens decide on. Does that make sense? The council every day sets the assembly's agenda. They say, okay, you're going to be debating this, this, and this. And then the assembly meets the next day and they have their list of things to talk about, and that's what they talk about. But if the council proposes something and the assembly doesn't want it, they just vote no.
So the council could propose to do things too, like a law. They could propose a law.
Yeah. But the assembly has to accept it for it to become a law.
Can the assembly just go off and make their own agenda at all, or was that like a strict
Well,
to-
once they get past the agenda that the council made for them, if they still have time left over, they can debate other things. And the assembly is the only group that can declare war, that can take Athens to war. So it's a vote of the people. Does that make sense? And Cleisthenes is said to have been the guy who came up with all these ideas, but it's probably him and his group of people. And But they put it in place, and it becomes extraordinarily successful, which is one reason we talk about Athens so much rather than all these other cities in Greece. And I have a short video to show you that will kind of flesh this out a little bit, make it more understandable than just kind of theory of who did what. they build a massive amount of infrastructure to support the new democracy, and they kind of alter their city in important ways to do it. So the idea of democracy becomes hugely important, and it becomes extremely successful for Athens, not just internally as a city, but they'll make decisions to their democracy to get involved in wars and whatnot that will empower them over many other Greek cities. But the Athenian democracy has major problems. Number one, it doesn't represent everybody. It only represents adult male citizens. So women are excluded, slaves are excluded, foreigners are excluded, children are excluded, and generally anyone who cannot trace their lineage, their family history, back to being an Athenian citizen, a full-fledged citizen, they're excluded. And historians today estimate that even with 6,000 guys showing up at the assembly to take part in the debates, it's only about 10% of the overall city population. So Athens is not a full-fledged democracy for everybody. It's a democracy for the adult, male, kind of dominant parts of society. But it's more of a democracy than had existed in virtually any other place in the history of the world at that point. So it's a restricted democracy, but it's more than a lot of other places had and would have going for many more hundreds of years. So, questions about any of that at all? Nope. Good. Moving on. Yeah. All right. Another problem with the Athenian democracy is that the vote of the assembly was law, and if something went wrong in the city, they might just blame an individual person or a group, even if they really had nothing to do with it. All you have to do is convince a majority in the assembly to vote them guilty of something, and they're found guilty and punished. So they develop a system of democracy and voting and passing laws, but they don't develop any kind of system for what you would today call like human rights. If the assembly voted to kick you and your family out of the city, or throw you in jail, or bring charges against you, no matter how ridiculous that move may have been, all you have to do is get other people to vote for it, and if it passes, it's enforced. So a lot of times in Athenian history, especially once they start having problems in the very late 400s, they will find scapegoats from amongst their own population. Famous people that a lot of Athenian men didn't like, and they just vote to punish them, even though they had really nothing to do with causing the problems in the first place. The Athenians also become obsessively worried that if one guy gives a lot of speeches in the assembly and becomes real popular, that he might somehow figure out a way to overthrow the democracy and establish a new monarchy, a new tyranny over the people. So they create another system that they called ostracism, which is basically every few months, every few weeks, and depending on when you're talking about, they will hold a general vote in the assembly where each guy is given a little piece of clay to write anybody's name on. And if the same name popped up on a couple thousand of these clay tablets called ostraka, you're basically voting to kick someone out of the city. If you write down a name, you write down the name of someone that you distrust to the point where you think they're a threat to the government, you should kick them out, exile them for 10 years.
Was it just twice or a certain amount of times?
A certain amount of times.
Yeah, like how many times?
How many times did they take the vote?
Did the name have to come up? Like,
oh, it had to be thousands of times. So it would have had to been like not just like 10 people don't like this person, but thousands of people distrust this one politician. And they developed this system so that if any one politician seems to be getting like too popular or too powerful, the next time there's an ostraka vote, people just write that guy's name down and no questions asked, he's kicked out of the city for 10 years. So it's designed to save them from dictatorship, to cut off the ability for any one person to build a dictatorship. Question?
That happen a lot?
Happen frequently, especially in times where, like, you're having problems in Athens and a lot of people just don't like somebody and they just write his name down and they kick him out of the city and say, oh, he's the cause of all the problems. Now that he's gone, everything's solved and we'll go back to the way things were. But the Ostraka vote was law and there was no appeal to it. If your name pops up on enough little ballots, you're out. And that's it, no questions asked. So today we call it ostracism. Like, someone's just that unpopular in society, they're ostracized, they're kind of removed from society. Even if today you still live in the city, if you're ostracized, just people won't talk to you, they'll avoid you, and you're kind of socially dead. Does this make sense? Yeah. So that's where the word comes from. And we find, archaeologists have found many kind of trash areas where these ballots were, after they were counted, they're just kind of thrown out and buried. So there's a whole, maybe millions of these little clay tablets that have been found by archaeologists by this point. And of course, once they ostracize someone, once they kick someone out of the city, they write it down in their official kind of book of laws and whatnot. So historians today have a pretty clear idea of who was ostracized and when, which it's been studied in extreme detail. There's a lot of interesting stories with that. So questions about ostracism at all? But that goes to show you that you don't have any human rights in this society. Even if you're a full-fledged citizen, if enough people just don't like you, you're kicked out. That's it. So you don't have any kind of political rights or public speech rights or anything like that, which is kind of one of the genius steps of the U.S. Constitution, which creates a system of democracy and choosing representatives and presidents and whatnot, but also combines that with human rights of freedom of speech and religion and gathering in public, and you can't be jailed for those things. Right? Does it sound familiar to you? Yeah. Alrighty. Moving on from here. Yep. Okay, so Athens has its democracy going around the year 500. The next big thing to talk about for Greece is that the Persians decide to invade. The Persians have conquered this gigantic empire, which we talked about already before, all the way out to this Anatolian peninsula. And the Greeks call the kind of western end of that peninsula Ionia. That's a Greek term. And there's a lot of Greek cities along that coastline. And now that the giant Persian Empire exists in the 500s, there are several Greek cities that don't want to be a part of Persia. And a few of them kind of start revolutions to try to break away and get independence. And they ask the other hundreds of Greek cities out here for help. Send soldiers, send money, send food, help us in our revolution against the Persians. Most Greek cities do not want to send help because they're scared. Because if you send help to a couple cities out here that the Persians claim to own, basically as colonies, then that might piss off the Persian leaders and they'll, come back and get revenge. Does that make sense? A few Greek cities do agree to send help. One is Athens, another one is Sparta. And they piss off the Persians to the point where the Persians decide to invade those cities and conquer them and destroy them as an example to the rest of Greece and to anyone else that might think about messing with the Persians. So the Persians, under Darius, in 492, they decide that they will attack Athens specifically, here in the middle of this map. And the Persians build up a big army, tens of thousands of soldiers, and their battle plan is to put them on boats from Anatolia and sail them across to land them on the shoreline next to Athens somewhere, and then unload their troops, attack Athens, and destroy the city. The democracy in Athens understands this is going on. It's not really a big secret. It's how confident the Persians were in winning this battle, winning this war. So the Athenians, they send basically a bunch of guys all along the coastline every 2 miles or something. They stand along the coastline and they look out to the ocean for a few days looking to see where the Persian boats are going to land. And when the Persians approach this place called Marathon, the Athenian kind of lookouts, they see the Persian boats coming in, and they run back to Athens, literally run back into the city to spread the message for the Athenian army to come out and get ready to fight the Persians at this place where they're landing, before the Persians can get to Athens. Does that make sense? And a battle happens at this place called Marathon, and most of the Greek cities expect the Persians to win because the Persians have never really lost before, right? But it ends up being a very surprising win for Athens, and not even a close call. I mean, the Athens win an overwhelming victory. The Athenian army takes up like 200 casualties, but they inflict like 6,000 casualties on the Persian armies. So it's an overwhelming victory for the Athenians. The Persians get back on their boats, who's left, and they go back to Anatolia. So this is celebrated throughout Athens and largely throughout Greece. The Athenian people rising up and defending themselves and winning this completely unexpected victory. So it's celebrated about every year in Athens by having a race from Marathon to Athens, which is like 24 miles or something like that, 26 miles, to commemorate the great victory. And this has become known as literally the race for Marathon, which are still run today. They're called marathons. So they're kind of endurance kind of races also. But that's where the tradition comes from. And Darius is very much humiliated in the Persian Empire. Angry, but it's such a costly thing to invade again that he decides not to really try it again. Does that make sense? Yes? Questions about that at all?
So they only made Greece once?
No. This is the first attempt under Darius. Darius isn't going to try it again. He's learned his lesson. And they don't invade all of Greece. They're just going after Athens at this point to make Athens an example to everybody else. When Darius dies, though, his son Xerxes becomes the next Persian emperor, and Xerxes wants to invade Greece and will dedicate massive amounts of resources to it, thinking that he's going to fulfill his father's dreams, basically. So Xerxes begins building up, right when he becomes Persian emperor, starts building up a gigantic invasion force, the size of which has probably never been seen in this part of the world yet. It's unbelievably massive. The eyewitness accounts of the thing are pretty unbelievable. It's estimated in today's historians to be something like 250,000 soldiers, which was just unthinkably large. Like 10 times larger than the army that Darius attacked Athens with. It's so large that they can't even get them all on boats and just try to launch them across the sea and hit Athens again. So their military strategy is just get as many soldiers together from the Persian Empire as they can. And they're going to have to walk. Back to the last map. Oops. Yeah, they're going to have to basically cross over land crossings and walk all the way around the northern parts of the Aegean Sea to get down into the main centers of the Greek cities. So this is going to be a much slower kind of lumbering invasion. And they will have a Persian navy following the troops as basically a supply line to keep them up with communications and whatever weapons and reinforcements and food they're going to need as they go. But this gigantic, unthinkably large invasion begins in 484. and it takes a long time. Their basic plan is to go all the way along the coastline through Macedonia, down into Attica, take out Athens, and maybe after that go into the Peloponnesus and take out the rest of the cities. And by doing this, basically conquer all of Greece. The Greek cities panic, basically. They feel that this is their apocalyptic war. The Greeks generally feel that either they will win and survive and remain independent of Persia, but if they lose, the Persian armies just might massacre every last Greek person they ever find. So the Greeks really feel that this is like, if they lose, this is the whole end of their civilization. It's the end of the world to them. Does that make sense? And of course, the Greeks think of themselves as like the heights of human culture and the most learned people and the most accomplished people in the history of the world. So they think of this as, you know, if we get defeated, then the world will go into another dark age for who knows how long, because the Persians are not nearly as good as the Greeks. Does that make sense? But this is the one time, really, in all of Greek history, ancient Greek history, where they stop fighting amongst themselves, because they realize that this foreign invasion is a threat to all of them. And they start banding together, and they form a few gigantic military alliances of many, many Greek cities to try to figure out how to stop the Persian invasion, stop the apocalypse, basically. Does that make sense? And because Sparta has by far the strongest armies, for reasons we talked about last time, Sparta becomes the leading city in the kind of land's army-based alliance. All the other cities that had strong foot soldiers, strong armies, they all get together with Sparta and plan out some kind of defense to fight against this Persian land invasion. Athens has the best navy, and they band together with all the other good navies in Greece and try to figure out how to defeat this the Persian navy, basically. So there's two big military alliances in Greece for self-defense. Okay. All right. The Spartans decide, as leaders of the armies, they decide to pick out this place called Thermopylae as the place of defense against the Persian invasion. And they choose it for a very specific reason, for geography. Thermopylae is about here. It is right next to the ocean, right next to the sea. I mean, it's like right up on the beach, basically. And they choose this place because on one side you have the water, and right close to where the water is coming in, you have these gigantic cliffs. So the huge Persian invasion can't just march through the place like they are all the other places they've marched through so far. The Persian army is so massive, and the pass at Thermopylae between the cliffs and the water is so narrow that the whole Persian army just can't march through like normal. They have to send small units through the pass one at a time. Does that make sense? It's like a choke point. It's a funnel. So, you know, just like if all of us in this room wanted to all get up and all go through that door at the same time, we can't all make it, right? So what do?
It's not keeping it down.
Yeah. We get into a big group right at the door, but only a couple of people can go out at the same time, right? We're constricted because the passageway is too narrow for all of us. This is exactly what Thermopylae is. The army is so massive, they can only trickle out a few groups of soldiers at a time through the pass. And basically, the Spartans and the rest of the united Greek army basically sits on the other side of the doorway, and they fight individual groups of Persian soldiers as they come through the pass. So even though the Greeks are outnumbered by probably a couple 100,000 soldiers, they don't have to fight them all at the same time. They just wait for a few hundred to come through at a time, and they take them on, and that's how they run it. So that stops the overwhelming numerical advantage that the Persians have at the battle. And that's how the battle goes for the first few days. The Greeks are actually winning the battle, or at least fighting it to a draw, fighting it so that Persians can't win. And they're stopping the Persian invasion. Until one Greek guy secretly goes to the Persian leaders and says that there's a secret pass around the cliffs so he can get around to the other side without having to go through the doorway. And when the Persians find that out, they send thousands and thousands of troops around through that pass, and they get behind the Greek armies and trap them. And when the Spartan king, leading the defense, named Leonidas, when he realizes this is going on and he sees the Persians coming in behind, he orders almost all the rest of the Greeks to leave Thermopylae to escape so they can figure out another place to fight. And in order to allow them to escape, Leonidas and the Spartans agree that they will stay at Thermopylae and fight to the death to slow the Persians down. Does that make sense? And this is really what the movie 300 is all about. Leonidas stays with his 300 soldiers, and they fight to the death. Not just Spartans. Historians will tell you that other Greek cities kept their soldiers there, and they also fought to the death. But Leonidas and his soldiers are kind of declared heroes, and now they're making movies about it. And they've been remembered amongst historians ever since. Does that make sense?
So the person that actually told the secret passage, like the other way to go through, was he part of the army, or was he like a...
Well, there's different accounts of that.
Okay.
So I think the film portrays him as being someone who wanted to be in the army, but they wouldn't let him. Is that right? I never watched it all the way to that part of the movie. But some historians think that it was just a Greek guy who took a lot of money to tell him the secret. So I can't ever remember his name. I think it's Ephialtes, but I might be wrong. But yeah, a lot of historians think that it just took a bribe, a gigantic bribe, a huge amount of gold to spill the secret. But one way or the other, they found out, and they kill Leonidas and the guys who remained. And the rest of the Greek armies retreat, and they try to find another place to fight, to figure out another way to stop the invasion. So over the long term, the Persians win the battle at Thermopylae. They continue their advance. But Thermopylae is more of a kind of moral victory for the Greeks. They realize as long as they have good planning, good strategy, they can actually win this war against an unthinkably massive enemy. So it gives them confidence to continue fighting, at least. The biggest naval battle really happens in a very similar kind of way around that island called Salamis. The Athenian leader, Themistocles, figured out a way of kind of, drawing the Persian navy into the waterway between the island and the mainland. And then the Persian navy kind of got stuck in that place. And when the tide hit the way Themistocles wanted, which the water would rush in and basically scatter the Persian boats so they're easier to attack, that's when Themistocles ordered the Greek attack and really destroyed the Persian fleet at this kind of choke point in the waterway, in a fairly similar kind of strategy that the land armies used at Thermopylae. And this one's extremely successful. It destroys so many boats that the Persian fleet is, some of it survives, but they're basically in retreat. The boats will leave Salamis, those that survive, and they basically go back home to Persia. So the Persian land army is left wandering around in Greece without their supply lines, without their reinforcements and their easy access to food and whatnot. So they continue fighting for, I think, another 2 years or something, wandering around in Greece until the last big battle is at Plataea, and that's when the Greeks finally get a big land victory over the Persian army, and the Persians agreed to basically go back home. So that's skipping through a whole lot of details. The war lasts 5 years. It starts in 484 and ends in 479. And it's some of the bloodiest, most brutal fighting that the Greeks have at least seen in a long, long time. Does that make sense? So when the Persians basically sign a treaty and agree to go back home, there's celebrations throughout Greece that, we've survived, and the heights of human civilization will continue. And the Athenians especially start thinking about how to expand their power in Greece, and the Athenians will basically start taking over Greece. So you go back to this circumstance after the Persian invasion is defeated, the so-called Persian Wars are over. All these cities in Greece, a lot of them say, okay, the war is over, we don't need these alliances anymore. And there's a lot of debate, especially from Athens. Athens wants to continue the alliance in case the Persians come back and attack again. So there's a lot of arguing back and forth, especially between Athens and all of its other cities that was in its alliance.
Is that all that yellow? Is that Athenian League or whatever?
Yeah, these are the cities generally in the Athens naval alliance. And the part in red on this map is the Spartan military alliance.
And then, so all those, the Persian Empire, they didn't control any of those cities?
Well, the Persians are forced to basically retreat from the coastline. Part of the treaty gives independence back to a lot of these formerly Greek cities. But the Persians retain control over the vast majority of the peninsula itself, as you can see on this map. Yeah. So Xerxes is humiliated by this, and he's pissed off about it. He'll think about launching other wars, but Persia's starting to have real economic problems at this point, so they've got other big problems to deal with. Other questions? Nope. The interesting thing for Athens is there's still a democracy at this point, and the democracy votes to start oppressing its other cities. They basically order the other cities to stay in the alliance and continue paying taxes to Athens to keep these boats and soldiers well kept, just in case the Persians attack. Most of the cities don't want to do this anymore because it's expensive. And the Athenian democracy votes every once in a while to attack one of its own member cities and destroy it as an example to all the others. So they take this alliance and they turn it into an empire where they're pushing all these other cities around and taking tax money from them and bringing it back to Athens eventually. Does that make sense? Which is an interesting thing. Most political scientists say that democracies don't really want war. If you give people a vote, they will not usually vote to go to war because people don't like fighting. Does that make sense? But this democracy votes to go to war over and over again to intimidate and abuse and oppress and take advantage of other Greek cities. And in the 400s, Athens is probably the most important city in Greece and definitely one of the wealthiest. And going into especially into the late 400s, the rich in Athens are starting to figure out how to win debates in the assembly and get the laws passed that they want that become favorable to them again. So the cycle repeats itself. There's no system of archons or anything that the rich can control anymore. So you have to convince the guys in the assembly, the average citizens, to vote to accept what the rich want. And the basic system for the rich to get what they want is to try to bribe some voters pay them for their votes, create political parties, and make promises of employment or land or just outright money. And another way is just through kind of ideology. The rich start talking about the old idea that if you support lower taxes for the rich, then the rich will hire more workers and the benefits will kind of trickle down to the average working people. And Athens is probably the wealthiest, most powerful city at this point in Greece. So the rich say, we've been doing this system for a little while on a small scale and it seems to work so well, so why not, do it more, do it bigger. And apparently a lot of guys in the assembly start to believe this stuff again. Does that make sense? And one guy who is retired is actually a former military leader in Athens who's retired and he goes into philosophy, is living in Athens. He's getting to be an older guy. He's kind of middle-aged and getting older as the years go on, obviously. His name is Socrates.
One of the great philosophers.
Yeah, and he will become extremely famous in Athens because he starts asking questions about this stuff.
Questions about everything.
Yeah, he's angry about the amount of bribery going on.
Don't they kill him?
Eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he's not just mad about the bribery that people are selling their votes to the rich. He's even more angry about the general population of Athens that doesn't want to be involved politically or just chooses to believe the simplest solutions to complex problems. So Socrates does, every once in a while he might get up and give a speech at the assembly, but that's not his general approach. His general thing is to walk through the city. I mean, he's a retired guy basically. He walks through the city and he goes to like coffee houses and restaurants and bars and places where people kind of hang out relaxing. And he bugs people. So this would be like if you're, sitting down with your friends at a bar or something and just hanging out, and some stranger walks up to you and starts asking you questions. What do you think about the people running for president? What do you think about the amount of corruption in our society? What do you think about justice or immorality or all these other kind of like big questions that humans often confront? And you just want to hang out with your friends and have a good time. What do you think of this person?
It's like linger.
Yeah. This guy's annoying as hell. Get the hell away from me. I'm trying to have fun here. Stop bothering me with your big important questions. I don't want to think about this stuff. And even if you answer some of his questions, he'll keep asking more. Wow. So you answer his questions maybe in an easy way just to kind of get him to go away, but he stays there and he asks more questions. He keeps going and going and going, and he never really leaves. He never leaves you alone. And that's his general system. He says that he pursues philosophy, which is a Greek term that generally translates to the love of knowledge, as a system of just asking questions, and sometimes questions that can be insulting or angering to people, as a means of dissecting the people in authority, questioning their ideas and their actions, and getting other people to question and think, rather than just sitting in their bar and drinking their beer and trying to ignore what's going on around them. So his kind of questioning is not just the political authorities, but the social authorities, the ideas of morality and moral codes that people are supposed to follow. And eventually he says, I even question my own ideas. He says, I'm not immune to these kinds of attacks just because I'm started asking questions. And he questions his own ideas and asks other people to question his ideas and criticize him. So he takes it to some pretty extreme levels sometimes. So he demands even self-criticism. That you question your own assumptions and your own outlook on life every once in a while. Because if you don't do that, you might, go down a path that's not all that reasonable. Does that make sense? And he called this fearless questioning, because a lot of governments in the world then and today are pretty brutal. They don't like having these questions asked about them, or their policies, or their actions. And they intimidate people into silence through fear. If you ask these questions, the government will come after you. And Socrates said that you cannot be afraid. That any government that fears these questions being asked is a government that should not be in office. So he said, do not fear the government's response to you or other people's response to you. These questions have to be asked in order to guarantee, or at least try to approach any kind of justice in society. Does that make sense? So if you stop asking the questions, and the government's going to do whatever it wants, and you get a tyranny eventually. So his word for it was parrhesia, which means totally honest questions. Allow the questions to go wherever they need to go to get to the heart of the matter. And today it's often called Socratic questioning, after him, obviously. And his general method, again, is you ask one question. If you get an answer, you start asking questions about the answer. You keep going. You just don't accept easy, simple ideas or simple solutions. You look for the complexity. You investigate. You just don't find something easy and simple and say, okay, everything's solved, and just, put your feet back up and go back to ignoring what's going on around you. And a lot of people started to hate him because he's doing this for years and eventually decades. He does this for 40 years, wandering around the city. And there's stories that start to be told that he doesn't bathe very well, so he's got food in his beard. He's kind of one of these smelly, annoying guys who bug people all over the city, day after day after day. But he had his own followers. Some students enjoy asking these questions and getting into these debates. And so he basically had this debate club that would just follow him around from place to place in the city day after day. And these students that would follow him around for years. And eventually start writing down what he said were his great lessons. He doesn't ever write anything down himself. It's the famous students who write down his big sayings and his big ideas after his death. But he called this method the source of my unpopularity, because people hated him for it. He's an annoyance in the city for a lot of people for years and years and years and years. So when things start really going bad for Athens in the very late 400s, the assembly takes a vote to put him on trial and basically blame him for Athens' fall from power. They get involved in a war that they're eventually going to lose. And he's not even in the government anymore. And they blame him. So he thinks it's ridiculous, but the vote goes to the assembly. Should we bring charges against this guy? And so many people don't like him because he's been annoying for so long that they vote to put him on trial. And does anyone want to take a guess at the charges? What did they charge him with?
Treason, corruption in the government.
Witchcraft.
Well, not treason, because he hasn't broken any laws. So they can't get him on that.
Ostracism?
It's close to ostracism. They charge him with corrupting the youth. He's going around to all these impressionable kids and asking these questions, and he's corrupting their brains to the point where they can't be good, logical
What they're saying
people
about our
of
colleges now.
Yeah, or a lot of colleges.
A lot.
Yeah. And he is found guilty, and his punishment is death. They decide to execute him for this.
Don't they give him poison or something like that?
Yep. And so many people throughout Athens apparently realized that executing him for something, for just asking questions, probably is going way too far. So a decision was made within the council to allow him to escape from jail one night so he could get away. They literally leave his cell door unlocked and opened for a whole night. And he refuses to go. He stays in his jail cell. And people ask him, why? You could have gone away and gone off to some other city and lived out your life. And he said, I shouldn't do that because the laws of Athens have protected my life for all these years. And he says, I'm not going to become a criminal now by escaping from jail. I will still abide by the laws of the city. So he drinks his poison and he dies. Does that make sense?
Is he probably mentally?
It doesn't appear to be. He took a kind of moral stand. He took an ideological stand. He said, I'm not going to start breaking laws now just because breaking the law would be to my advantage. I followed the law my whole life, and I will still follow the law, even if it's a ridiculous decision. And he's getting to be, he's 70 years old at this point. So that's what he says. Yeah. So that's how he dies. And even in paintings today, he's often painted with other philosophers, and he's got this little cup of red drink.
Yeah.
And that's the poison.
What was it?
What was it called?
It kills you fast.
It was supposed to kill you fast, but apparently they watered his down, so it killed him slowly over a couple days.
Oh, no.
So yeah, that's what happens when powerful people don't like somebody sometimes.
Torture.
But yeah, what was that thing called? It was from a certain root of a certain really dangerous plant, and it was supposed to be you drink literally one mouthful and you're dead within seconds.
They watered it down.
Yep. So he went through a very painful couple of days before he died. Yeah. So his most famous students are very upset by this and write down his teachings and whatnot after he's dead. And they write down a history of the trial, and they love Socrates, so you can imagine what reading the history of that trial is like. It's like, this trial is awful, it's a kangaroo court, the judge is an idiot, and
Murderer.
yeah, just to destroy the reputation of the people they blame for killing their mentor. His most famous student is Plato, and Plato is actually the guy who writes a lot of stuff down. Plato becomes a major philosopher in his own right. So Plato is getting to be getting close to middle age. He's about in his 20s or so, about 30 years old or so when Socrates dies, when he's executed. But Plato has spent years with Socrates. And Socrates was like his father figure. So Plato was really angry about this and disillusioned with the Athenian government and democracy. So Plato starts writing and thinking about this democracy hasn't functioned well because it convicted and executed an innocent man. So in his earlier writings on politics, Plato struggles with this idea of democracy. And in his early writing says that democracy isn't really all that great, the way a lot of Athenians think it is, because democracy can lead to what Plato basically calls mob rule. When the people get outraged about something, they'll find a scapegoat, maybe kill him, even if that guy had nothing to do with it. So Plato starts trying to think, well, how can we have some kind of safeguards for a democracy to make sure this kind of crap doesn't keep happening? And in his earlier writings, he starts talking about how even if you have a democracy, that the people maybe should elect leaders into important offices. And hopefully they'll vote for leaders who have these special abilities. Like a person who is really good at math just naturally should be elected to be the head tax collector or the head accountant for the city, the head treasurer. And the best soldiers should be elected to be the generals of the army. Elect people into powerful offices according to their natural gifts and what they've studied and what they're good at. And in that way, Plato hoped that the democracy could depend on what he called saviors. But as Plato grew older, he also came to later on write other books and things, articles and whatnot, where he really questions his earlier ideas. He basically says if you give that kind of power to certain individuals, that people are by nature greedy. And Plato kind of comes up with this saying that power corrupts everybody. If you give certain people that amount of power, they will often make decisions in order to protect their power and stay in office rather than make decisions for the good of overall society. So he also started really deeply questioning the role of these so-called saviors. And he starts saying maybe you don't want to give that much power to certain individuals because they're going to be corrupted. If not by money, then it's just the love of power, the love of being the big decision makers. So in the end, Plato is kind of miserable in politics. he doesn't know what the solution is. And these are very famous books that if you ever take political science classes, you'll read his writings on the Republic and all kinds of things.
The Republic? Democracy.
Well, he calls his book The Republic, or his writings are gathered together in a book that comes to be known as Republic. So, questions about Socrates or Plato's political ideas or philosophy? These are still essential debates in democracies and politics today. I mean, how much do you want to have the popular vote determine things, what the people want? And how much do you want to rely on big, famous politicians? And how do you kind of balance those two?